Nathan, the company needs to move forward. Don't take it personally.
Nathan, the company needs to move forward. Don't take it personally. The words echoed like a muffled gunshot in the glass room. Across the table, Richard Hale, the CEO, was organizing some papers, avoiding my gaze. The Vortex Dynamics badge, the company I saw as an extension of my soul, trembled in my hands. It was the end. The startup I'd helped bring from paper to reality, whose walls I'd painted myself on weekends, and whose first lines of code had come from my laptop during sleepless dawns, was firing me on the same day it announced its IPO. Outside, the San Francisco rain beat against the window, each drop a second less in the countdown of my dignity. What was left of it? I picked up the cardboard box, a humiliating cliché that the movies had never managed to capture in its entirety. The office, once a playground of innovation and contagious energy, now seemed like a glass mausoleum of broken promises. As I walked down the corridors, the faces that had once greeted me with smiles now averted their eyes, fixed on screens that had suddenly become urgently important. The human innovation startup reeked of expensive perfume and a falseness that clung to the air. In the elevator, the mirror reflected back the gaze of someone who hadn't just lost a job, but faith. In that reflection, however, behind the defeat, something new and dangerous was beginning to be born. A cold gleam I'd never seen before. As I left the building, the wind cut through my cheap suit as if mocking my naivety. I looked at the blue Vortex logo glistening under the rain, and a silent promise took shape on my lips, a vow that would haunt me for years. If they took me out of the game, I'll buy the board. It wasn't a shout, but a whisper loaded with glacial certainty. I pulled out my phone, the screen wet from the drops, and opened the stock market app. I started studying, not out of anger, not yet, but out of strategy. Anger is loud and stupid. Strategy is silent and lethal. That same night, in my empty apartment echoing with failure, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice, tired and intuitive as always, carried the weight of someone who already knew my falls, but still believed in my comebacks. "You'll be okay, Nate?" she asked. And for a moment, the armor I was beginning to build cracked. I felt the lump in my throat, the urge to confess that the ground had vanished, that I was in free fall. But shame was stronger. I forced a neutral tone. "Yes, Mom, I'm fine. I just need some time." I lied. And that lie was the first stone in the foundation of the new man I needed to become. I hung up the phone and stared at the computer screen, where charts and numbers flickered. Revenge, I discovered that night, doesn't start with hate, but with the coldness of an Excel spreadsheet, and mine was blank, waiting to be filled. Unemployment has a specific smell, a mix of stale coffee, fear, and the fine dust that accumulates over abandoned dreams. My days became a ritual of digital solitude. With every resume sent out for formality, an automated, impersonal response fed the void. But I wasn't looking for a job. I was studying the enemy. I watched every interview with Richard Hale, who was quickly becoming the new Silicon Valley celebrity, the visionary, the genius who would change the world. I watched him with a glass of cheap whiskey in one hand and a notepad in the other, dissecting his words, his gestures, the growing arrogance in his speech. It wasn't jealousy. It was risk analysis. The financial market can forgive many things, but it never forgives hubris for long. And I knew what he was made of. What no one in those interviews, in those magazine articles, knew was that the artificial intelligence algorithm that put Vortex Dynamics on the map, the crown jewel that justified its billion-dollar valuation, had been written by me. Every line of that code screamed my name. Every processing logic was a map of my mind. Before leaving, in the confusion of the firing, I'd made a copy. not out of premeditation, but out of self-preservation instinct, like a writer saving a copy of his manuscript. Now that file on my hard drive was my only asset, the key to everything. With the $5,000 from my severance, I started investing. At first, I lost money. I bet on volatile stocks, followed tips from dubious forums, acted with my heart. Each loss was an expensive lesson, a private class with the most ruthless professor of all, the market. But with every mistake, I learned. I learned to separate emotion from analysis, to identify patterns, to think not like a gambler, but like a hunter. A year passed. The sleepless nights turned into discipline. Anger turned into patience, and the $5,000 turned into $500,000. It wasn't luck. It was the purest, coldest revenge distilled into capital. That's when I received a message. Nathan, it's Samantha Reed. Remember me? I was on the QA team at Vortex Dynamics. Samantha, one of the few who had looked at me with compassion on the day of my firing, before being discarded months later for redundancy. We met at a cafe that smelled of burnt beans and forgotten hopes. She had the same look I saw in the mirror, that of someone who had believed too much. I told her my plan. She listened in silence, the coffee cooling in her cup. When she finished, she stared at me, her eyes flashing with an intensity I recognized as my own. "Nate, the question isn't whether you deserve revenge," she said, leaning forward. "The question is, are you going to keep complaining or finally fight back?"
Samantha's words were the gasoline my engine needed. That same night, revenge gained a name: Project Ironclad. It wouldn't just be a series of investments, but an architecture of power. A silent holding company built with a chain of corporate identities, each serving as a shield for the other. The goal was simple and brutal: buy Vortex shares in such small and scattered slices that they would become invisible in the daily reports of a Wall Street giant. I wouldn't be a shark attacking the boat. I would be the ocean itself, rising slowly until it swallowed everything. I had the time and patience of a man who had already lost everything and therefore had nothing left to fear. My small apartment in Oakland turned into a digital bunker. Market maps, financial reports, and capital flow diagrams covered the walls. The first shares I bought seemed insignificant, a few hundred, then a few thousand, but for me, every penny was symbolic. It was my peace back. It was my code taking shape again, not on a screen, but in an investment portfolio. The past was starting to owe me interest. I operated in the dead of night, in silence broken only by the hum of the computer and the sound of the keyboard, my new orchestra. While the world dreamed, I built an empire in the shadows. Samantha became my discreet partner, my external conscience. Using her experience, she helped me navigate the bureaucracy, open accounts in tax havens, and ensure every move was legal, clean, and above all, impossible to trace back to me. However, as my portfolio grew, an unsettling thought began to haunt me in the quiet hours of the early morning. I was becoming methodical, cold, calculating. I was becoming Richard. Revenge is a mirror. The more you stare at your enemy, the more you see your own reflection merge with his. Was it justice I sought, or just the replacement of one tyrant with another? To keep from getting lost, I started recording videos, just for myself. They were vents, confessions to the phone camera. "If you've ever been fired unjustly, listen to me," I recorded one night, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "They can take your badge, your desk, your title, but they can't erase what you built. Failure isn't a sentence, it's just the raw material for rebirth." Those recordings became my logbook, a reminder of why I started. Revenge would be sweeter if it came disguised as success, and for that, I needed to master the game they never taught me: how money really works. 2 years after the start of Project Ironclad, Vortex was worth tens of billions, and I, silently, owned nearly 3% of it. That's when Samantha told me, "You need to step out of the shadows, Nate. You need allies, even if they don't know they're your allies." That's how I ended up at an investor's cocktail on the rooftop of a Manhattan hotel. The air was rarefied, charged with ambition and the smell of old money. The view was a sea of lights, each one representing a deal, a fortune, a promise. And it was there that fate introduced me to Olivia Parker. Elegant, confident, with that kind of calm that only someone who has lost a lot can display. She was a venture capitalist, known for her sharp intelligence and for sniffing out opportunities where no one else saw them. She approached me, curious about the new face in the crowd. "You don't talk much," she observed, a discreet smile on her face. "That's good. Men who talk too much are usually selling wind." In that moment, I knew she would be useful. When she asked what I did, I answered with the truth, but not the whole truth. "I buy what people think is already lost." She raised an eyebrow. "So you buy hope?" she quipped. "No," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "I buy power." Her smile widened. Interest. I discovered that same night that Olivia was a minority partner in Vortex. She had no idea who I was, but I knew everything about her. Her acquisitions, her connections, her investment patterns. She was the perfect link between money and opportunity, and without realizing it, was beginning to become my entry point into the heart of the company. Our conversations became more frequent in the weeks to follow. Business lunches, quick calls, exchanged emails, and then something dangerous happened. I started to like her intelligence, her vision, the way she talked about ethics and new beginnings. Every conversation with her was a reminder of the man I was before everything, and that was a variable I couldn't control. Revenge requires coldness, and Olivia reminded me of what it was like to feel. I pretended to agree with her ideals, but inside, my heart pulsed in binary code. 1 for action, 0 for emotion. The risk was immense. On the last night we saw each other in New York, she looked at me with an intensity that disarmed me. "Nathan, I feel like you're about to change something big." I just replied, "I am." When she left, I looked at the city horizon and a shiver ran down my spine. The ghost was back. Only this time, he came in a suit with capital and a thirst for control. The phone buzzed. It was Olivia. "There's an exclusive event for Vortex shareholders tomorrow night. All the big names will be there. Want to go with me?" I hesitated. The invitation was too perfect. A trap or an opportunity? Maybe both. "Sure," I replied. As I hung up, I realized what that meant. The ghost hadn't just returned. He was about to be announced. The Vortex Events Hall looked like a corporate cathedral. Giant screens displayed exponential growth charts. Champagne flowed like water, and the smiles were as rehearsed as the speeches. I was there, among them, invisible, and at the same time, in control of everything. Olivia walked beside me radiant, introducing me to executives and investors, with no idea that the man on her arm was the company's largest hidden shareholder. Every handshake, every word exchanged was a piece moving on my private board. The tension was almost electric. I felt the curious glances on me, the newbie who arrived with Olivia Parker. Little did they know.
Richard took the stage with the confidence of an emperor. He spoke of growth, innovation, the bright future of Vortex. But while he smiled for the flashes, I discreetly pulled out my phone. I accessed the investment app, where a buy order was pre-programmed. With a single click, I executed the final major transaction of Project Ironclad. The purchase that would take me from a significant investor to an imminent threat. In that instant, 9% of Vortex Dynamics belonged to my holdings. Enough to demand a seat on the board. Enough to have a voice, a vote. and veto power. I felt my heart race, not with euphoria, but with absolute control. Everything I'd planned for years was falling into place with the precision of a Swiss watch mechanism. In another state, Samantha monitored the transactions in real time. A message from her buzzed in my pocket. "You did it." I replied with 2 words that carried the weight of the world. Phase 1. The game, at last, had begun. Later at dinner, fate placed me at the same table as Richard. Olivia, still unaware of everything, made the formal introductions. The irony was palpable. "Nathan Reeves, I thought you disappeared off the map," Richard said with that arrogant tone of someone who thinks he's the center of the universe. I smiled, a calm, rehearsed smile. "I disappeared for a while. But ghosts always come back, Richard. Didn't you know?" He eyed me, trying to decipher the veiled threat. I just raised my glass. "To success. Yours. And mine." Olivia watched the exchange, her curiosity turning into a slight suspicion. "You two have known each other a long time?" Richard answered before I could, with a touch of cruelty. "Yes, I fired him." I just completed, without changing expression, and it was the best business lesson I ever had. When dinner ended, Richard gave me a condescending pat on the shoulder. "Good luck with your investments, Nathan." I returned the gesture, firm, looking him in the eye. "Luck is for those without a plan, Richard. And I have one." He laughed, as if it were a joke. But it wasn't. The king had just shaken the hand of the man who would gild his guillotine. In the days following the event, Olivia was different, more distant, cautious. There was something in her gaze, a mix of doubt and a fear I couldn't decipher. I knew Richard was a master at the art of manipulation. I imagined him in a quiet room, planting seeds of poison in her mind, describing me as a dangerous, resentful, unstable man. He doesn't want to build anything. He just wants to destroy. Her doubt was proof of his talent. And then the phone rang. It was 2 a.m. Her voice was choked, laden with guilt. "He knows, Nathan. Somehow he put the pieces together. He knows who you are." I took a deep breath. There was no surprise, just confirmation of the inevitable. "What exactly did you tell him?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. I just confirmed what he already suspected, that you were behind the stock purchases." Betrayal had a metallic taste, familiar. But unlike what she might have expected, I didn't yell. There was no explosion. Years of discipline had turned my anger into frozen fuel. "Great," I said with a calm that scared her. "Then the show can begin." And I hung up. The war, until then fought in the shadows, had just gone public. While Richard rushed to gather the board, prepare his defense, and try to paint me as a corporate saboteur, Samantha and I moved the final pieces. From her digital bunker, she coordinated a series of quick and aggressive moves. We no longer needed to hide. At 3:47 a.m., Ironclad Ventures officially took 11.4% of Vortex Dynamics. I was no longer a hidden investor. I was, publicly, the second most powerful name in the company. The next morning, the financial press exploded. Mysterious investor launches attack and becomes Vortex's largest individual shareholder. Chaos was installed. Richard called a press conference to try to contain the damage. I was there, in the front row. He spoke with a broken smile, talking about stability and confidence. But with every word, I saw the fear grow in his eyes. He knew the board had flipped. He was no longer the player. He was the piece.
That night, Olivia showed up at my apartment. She was crying. "I never meant to hurt you, Nathan. I swear." I watched her in silence for a moment. the rain beating on the window outside. There was no anger, just a deep weariness. You didn't hurt me, Olivia. You just accelerated the inevitable. I walked to the window, looked at the city horizon, and whispered more to myself than to her. The king bleeds. Finally. Outside, the rain fell hard, as if the world were washing away the dust of a past that was finally coming to an end. The Vortex building seemed different that day. Colder, quieter, as if holding its breath. The extraordinary shareholders' meeting was about to begin. Every chair was occupied by a tense face, by someone pretending to understand business but who really lived off appearances and quarterly bonuses. I entered in an impeccable suit and a serene face, but inside my blood boiled in a mix of anticipation and exhaustion. On the stage, Richard was already waiting for me. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was a mask of contained fury. The man who thought himself a god had just discovered he was mortal. When I took the microphone, the camera flashes exploded. The silence in the hall was total. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Nathan Reeves. I paused, letting my name hang in the air. Some of you may remember me as the systems analyst who helped create the algorithm that made this company what it is. A murmur ran through the audience. Richard tried to interrupt me, but I continued, my voice firm and cutting. And you may also know me as the man who was fired weeks before the IPO for refusing to lie in the performance reports. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. With a click, I projected the documents onto the giant screen behind me. Old reports, results spreadsheets, emails, and, highlighted, Richard's forged signatures, manipulating data to inflate the company's value and secure a stratospheric IPO. The same evidence I'd kept for years. The audience stirred. He tried to deny it, stammering about personal revenge, but the numbers on the screen didn't lie. You didn't build this company, Richard, I said, looking directly at him. You corrupted it. You destroyed the soul of what we promised to create. He stood up, his face red. You want to destroy me, Reeves? I smiled, a sad, almost weary smile. No, Richard, you've already done that yourself. I'm just showing the world the ruins you left behind. The crowd exploded. The myth of the Silicon Valley visionary had just been stripped bare in front of his own empire. When the meeting ended and the board announced his immediate removal, he passed by me in the hallway, pale, defeated. You won, he murmured. Not yet, I replied, my voice low. Winning is rebuilding what you broke. I left the building and breathed the cold air. Justice tasted like victory, but also like an unexpected emptiness. The man who entered there for revenge wasn't the same one leaving. Something in me had fallen with him, too. The phone rang. It was Samantha. They want to see you, now. The game wasn't over yet. They named me interim CEO. The same people who had ignored me now applauded me. The system that crushed me now crowned me. Samantha looked at me and whispered, You did it, Nate, but don't forget who you were when it all began. Taking the CEO chair at Vortex was like sitting on a glass throne, transparent, brilliant, and deadly fragile. My first day began with forced applause, but the executives' glances betrayed the real feeling. Fear. Revenge had turned into power, and power inspires more fear than respect. Walking the corridors, I realized that place still smelled of my past, but now I was the ghost haunting others. My first action was to gather the board. I said, the era of masks is over. and announced Samantha's hiring as the new director of ethics and transparency. It was a statement. The Avenger now preached morals, but I desperately needed to rebuild not just the company, but myself. I spent the following months buried in reports, cutting suspicious contracts and opening audits.
Vortex stabilized. Profits returned. I was the hero of the story, the CEO who defeated the system. But the nights were long and silent. Alone, in the top floor office, I wondered if it had all been worth it. Success has a strange echo. It shouts louder when the world goes quiet. I had traded the sharp pain of injustice for the chronic anesthesia of power. Nothing hurt anymore. And that was the scariest thing of all. The glow of revenge fades quickly when you realize what you sacrificed to light it. In the dead of night, I decided to record a new video. The last one. I sat in front of the camera, the city lights creating a halo around me. People think revenge is about destroying the enemy, I began, my voice more honest than ever. But the real danger is losing yourself in the process. I got everything I wanted, and yet I feel like something essential was left behind. I sighed. Maybe success doesn't heal. Maybe it just silences the pain. I posted the video without thinking. The next day, it went viral. But the comments calling me inspirational sounded empty. That wasn't inspiration, it was a confession. I wanted to know if anything human was still left in me. The cycle closed in a packed auditorium, months later. It was my first public event as permanent CEO. On the big screen, I announced the final measure, the definitive removal of Richard Hale from the shareholder registry using the moral clauses he himself had ignored. The applause was thunderous, but to me, it sounded distant. When I stepped off the stage, Samantha was waiting. "It's over," she said. "No," I replied. "We just closed one door. Winning isn't climbing. It's knowing when to stop falling." Hours later, in the silence of my office, I recorded a final message. If you think failure is the end, you still haven't understood the game. Sometimes losing is the only way to change the rules. I paused, looking at the lens. They fired me before the IPO, and I bought it all back. But this story isn't about me. It's about you. It's about the next one who will turn pain into strategy and fall into momentum. If you want to learn how to rebuild your empire from the ruins, subscribe. The next game changer could be yours. I clicked publish. Outside, the city pulsed. And for the first time, I didn't want to conquer it anymore. I just wanted to live in it.